Let's sing our theme song, Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus. And we'll sing that twice. Let's sing. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. Amen.
Good afternoon. Wonderful to see you. So I think most of you know who I am. I have been around here so long that I'm older than the foundations of this church. I predate it by a few weeks. My family has worshipped in this church forever. My mom, back in the late 1980s, was one of Willowdale's first ordained female elders. And my dad followed her a few years later when they finally convinced him to be an elder. So tonight, what happened to the Sabbath? As Creation Week drew to a close, God was about to give two of his greatest gifts to the human race. On the Friday of Creation Week, he created our first parents, and he gave us the gift of marriage and the family. As the sun set on the first Friday evening of Earth's history, he gave us the Sabbath. The Sabbath was given as a stop sign, a reset button. Stop. Remember who created you, who loves you. It was a time to focus on connecting with our Creator and each other. The Sabbath is about relationships, our relationship with our Creator and our fellow human beings. It's also about worship and thankfulness to a Father who loves his children and desires a personal relationship with each one. The Sabbath was not given to any special ethnic group or religious group. It was given to the human race. It has existed since the beginning of Earth's history. The human race had barely started when it tripped and fell on its face as sin entered the picture. Now, the Creator added the promise of a Redeemer, someone who would buy back the human race, who would pay the price that sin demands. As he called a group of slaves out of Egypt and slavery, he gave them two great tasks: to keep alive a knowledge of the one true God and his dealings with the human race, and to be the nation into which the world's Redeemer would be born. As they stood trembling before Sinai, God laid out the principles by which they would live their lives. They would love their neighbor as themselves, but above all, they would love God supremely. In the first 4 commandments, he shows what it means to love God supremely. Included in those commands was a Sabbath rest, Sabbath worship. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy because I am your Creator. As the Creator, he has the right to set the terms for worship. Men can make anything sacred. Only a holy being can make something holy. God hallowed, made holy the seventh day. The rest was not just for the Israelites, but for everyone, even the stranger within their gates. And in Exodus 23, it was even for their livestock. As Israel came to the close of their desert wanderings, and the law was again given, and they were told now that the Sabbath wasn't only a memorial for creation, it was a memorial of deliverance. As they celebrated the Sabbath each week, it was to be a reminder that their Creator was also their deliverer. Not only theirs, but the whole human race. Their knowledge of God and the promise of a Savior was to be shared with all around them. The Sabbath was to be a sanctuary, a haven, a sacred place in time to protect them from the demands of their everyday lives, not only for them, but for the human race, for all time. We are slaves to maintaining our lives. The Sabbath gives us a day to step away from that. Isaiah 56 basically says the Sabbath is for everyone who chooses to love God. It was to bind humans to their God. And you cannot forget something you are bound to. Okay, 1 second here. Sometimes his chosen people got it. Sometimes they totally dropped the ball. After about 900 years of up and down in their relationship with God, he finally allowed them to go into Babylon as captives. As the remnant returned to their land after 70 years of captivity, they realized that one of the things that had led them into captivity in the first place was their unfaithfulness to God and his law, which included the Sabbath. To make sure they would never make that mistake again, they created laws to keep them from breaking laws. These were known as fence laws. At the time God appeared on earth in the person of Jesus, the Sabbath was a burden and a nightmare. Jesus, the creator of the Sabbath, the lawgiver of Sinai, the one that the Sabbath was pointing to, made it his mission to bring the Sabbath back to its original purpose, a day of worship and blessing to the human race. Many of his miracles were performed on the Sabbath to help people understand what the Sabbath was meant to be. The only rules he broke regarding the Sabbath were the rules made by men. By the way Christ lived his life, he showed what true Sabbath keeping meant. Jesus had 3.5 years of public life, and there was a lot of controversy with the religious leaders about how you were supposed to keep Sabbath. Jesus never once said it should not be kept. The religious leaders, though, were so afraid that people would follow Jesus and his way of keeping the Sabbath that it would bring down the wrath of God and destroy them as a nation. We come to Luke 10. Jesus is telling another story, a very well-known story, the parable of the Good Samaritan. I'm not going to focus on the parable. I'm going to focus on the lead into it. An expert in Jewish law is asking a question. What must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus responds with, what does the law say? How do you understand it? The expert in the law comes back with, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind. Supreme love to God and love your neighbor as yourself. The answer showed that he understood, at least on an intellectual level, that the law was about relationships, not about ticking boxes. The first 4 commandments deal with our relationship to God, and sitting right there in the middle is remember the Sabbath day. God sees the keeping of the Sabbath as part of our relationship with him. Near the end of his ministry, there's a discourse recorded in Matthew 24, also Mark 13, and Luke 21. The disciples are trying to understand what he's talking about, this destruction of Jerusalem and his second coming. He doesn't try to explain them as two different events. They're 2,000 years apart, and they're not going to get that. Instead, some of the same principles are going to apply, and Christ kind of tells it as one event. Jesus tells them these things so that when they see them coming, they will remember what he said. One of the things he tells his followers to pray is that their flight will not be on the Sabbath. There is only one day they would have understood as the Sabbath, the seventh day of the week. Where am I going with this? Jesus knew the fall of Jerusalem was almost 40 years away. When it came, he expected his followers to be worshiping on the seventh day of the week, the Sabbath. As Jerusalem fell, the Sabbath was still to be an important sacred day in their weekly cycle. Finally, we come to the Passover weekend, as the lamb slain from the foundation of the world is finally sacrificed. The creator and the giver of the Sabbath is hanging on a cross. As the afternoon of that Friday moves toward the Sabbath hours, his body is removed from the cross and placed in a borrowed tomb. Christ will again rest as he did when he completed his work of creation. He has now completed his work of redemption. One of the great purposes of the Sabbath is for us to fix our eyes on our Creator, who is also our Redeemer. As Matthew closes his gospel, he closes it with the Great Commission to go and make disciples of all nations and to teach them what Christ has taught and to baptize. When Jesus talked about the law, he was talking about our relationship with God and our fellow human beings. He also talked about the fact that the law wasn't going anywhere. From the beginning of God's dealings with the human race, he has stated that this is what a relationship with me looks like. I am the creator, I am God. I define the relationship. In terms of that if the terms of that relationship were so important, why would he decide to throw them out after Calvary? If the breaking of that relationship demanded death, and the debt was paid by a member of the Godhead, why get rid of it? The law given at Sinai only stated the bare bones of what a relationship between God and the human race looks like. It was in the life of Jesus that we fully see what it means. You know what? What it means. Jesus, in his life here on earth, valued the Sabbath. He freed it from the trappings, and he helped us to understand it was to be a blessing to us and a day for us to bless others. And so we come to the early Christian church. They did not set out to call themselves Christians. They just wanted their fellow Jewish brothers and sisters to understand that this Jesus of Nazareth was the fulfillment of all the prophecies that pointed to the Messiah. They saw their faith in Christ as a natural progression of their Jewish faith. Paul, in writing to the Hebrews, in Hebrews 4, talks about a Sabbath rest for the people of God. The Sabbath is now also about salvation from sin. The Sabbath in Christianity is still important. Resting on the Sabbath in the first century still matters. Even the gospel writers, writing long after the death and resurrection of Christ, only understood one Sabbath. The Gospel of John is believed to be the last gospel written, and it was written sometime between 900 and 100 AD. For the first 3 years after the crucifixion, the gospel was primarily preached to the Jewish nation. The people who accepted Christ came from a Jewish background, and the Sabbath wasn't a foreign concept to them. After the stoning of Stephen, the early Christians began to understand the gospel was for everyone. Salvation was for all. As the gospel went to the Gentiles, there was controversy over what it meant to be a follower of Christ if you didn't have a Jewish background. What was and wasn't necessary for salvation. A number of things are questioned. No one questions the Sabbath. Okay. Christianity began in the backwater of the Roman Empire. The Romans had quite a collection of gods. They ended up with ancestor worship, sun worship, emperor worship. The Jews, out of which Christianity came, didn't have icons or images or fertility rites. They had one God who they could not see, a sacred day when everyday life stopped, and they worshiped this invisible God. Roman culture at the time had nothing like this. Let's just say that the history of Rome and the Jewish nation doesn't have a lot of love in it. There were a couple of revolts at the beginning of the 2nd century AD, and basically Judaism is outlawed. As the Christian church becomes more Gentile and things get uglier between Rome and the Jews, the Christians don't really want to get caught in the crossfire. Now, I get that. I understand where they were coming from. It wasn't a good situation for the early Christians, but our discomfort or even our safety doesn't change God's command. One of the great signs of being Jewish was keeping the Sabbath. By the beginning of the 2nd century, worship on the first day of the week was starting to creep into Christianity as a way to distinguish it from Judaism. Christian leaders had to come up with some reason for this change. So Justin the Martyr said, it was because this was the day that the creation of the world began and the day Christ rose. By the time worship on the first day of the week shows up by the time worship on the first day of the week shows up, it starts in Alexandria and Rome. The apostles, the ones who knew Jesus, and the one who met him on the road to Damascus have all been martyred, except for John. They tried to kill him, but he dies in old age. The day that was hallowed, the day that was blessed as a memorial of creation. Was the 7th. It wasn't the 1st. If God makes something holy, humans can't make it unholy, nor can they move the blessing to something else. The first day of the week, the day of the sun, was becoming more popular among Christians as the day to worship. Christians were a minority in a world that worshiped many gods, the emperor, dead or alive, and the sun. The Roman Empire is believed to have started about 30 years before Christ, when the heir of Julius Caesar, Octavian, defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Oh, please, Faith, where are you going? About 10 BC, Augustus brings an to Rome from Egypt and sets it up in the Circus Maximus. If you want to know what the Circus Maximus think the chariot race from Ben-Hur. It was something like that. To celebrate the conquest of Egypt, and it's dedicated to the sun god. The Roman sun god is honored for the conquest of Egypt. Sun worship becomes a big deal in the Roman Empire. The sun was worshipped because the night could not conquer it. It was sola invictus, the unconquered sun. By 274 AD, it was the official religion of Rome. Rome also worshipped the emperor. And by the early 300s AD, we have a pagan emperor, Constantine, who worships the sun but declares himself to be a Christian. Around 312 AD, by the way, he gets himself baptized just on his deathbed because he wanted to make sure all the sins that he ever committed were covered, so that's when he decided to get baptized, right at the very end. By 321 AD, he says, on the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and the people residing in the cities and all the workshops be closed. And all the workshops. In the country, though, if you were engaged in agricultural working, that was fine. This law isn't really a religious law. It is more a civil law, but you can see how worshiping on the first day of the week is really starting to creep into the life of the common people. And this law is basically saying in the cities we're going to have a day of rest, and it's going to be on the day of the sun. He does promote Christianity. He doesn't prohibit paganism. Then by the Council of Laodicea, in 363, 64 AD, there are clear commands that Christians must not Judaize by resting on the Sabbath, but must work on that day, rather honoring the Lord's day, and if they can, resting then as Christians on the first day of the week. But if any are found to be Judaizers, let them be anathema from Christ. And I had never heard of that word. It means cursed, excommunicated. By the 5th century, we have this statement. For although almost all churches throughout the world celebrate the sacred mysteries of the Sabbath every week, yet the Christians of Alexandria and at Rome, on account of some ancient tradition, have ceased to do this. In spite of whatever was said 100 years before at the Council of Laodicea, the Sabbath still matters to many Christians. Where am I going with this? We are 400 years away from Christianity's beginnings, over 100 years from Constantine, and Christians are still worshiping on the 7th day of the week. Another interesting fact that I picked up, here we are. Another interesting fact that I picked up, when Christianity came to the Celtic believers in the areas like what is now Scotland, it came with the 7th-day Sabbath, and that is when they worshipped. A man by the name of James C. Moffat wrote The Church in Scotland. It seems to have been customary in the Celtic churches of early times to keep Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath, as a day of rest from labor. They obeyed the 4th commandment literally upon the 7th day of the week. We also have St. Patrick, and we know that he was a Sabbath keeper. The Roman Empire slowly lost its political power over a period of time due to a number of factors. It had already split in two, the Western Empire and the Eastern one, in the early 300s. The end of the Western Empire is considered to be 476 AD, when a German barbarian king disposes of the last Roman Empire and the imperial signa are sent to the Eastern Empire. That empire is going to last about another 1,000 years. When a power falls, it creates a power vacuum, and something will arise to fill that spot. The area that was to become Western Europe had some form of Christianity, a strange mixture of truth, tradition, error, with a little paganism tossed in for seasoning. The bishop of the church in Rome was seen as the main bishop, and slowly over time, his authority becomes supreme. Let's take a step back here for a moment, way back, to the battle between the Godhead and Lucifer, who becomes Satan or the devil. The devil wants God's power, but not his character. A being who said, I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will make myself like the Most High. The devil loses that battle at the cross. His fate is sealed. If he cannot go after God, he can go after what God treasures, those who love him. Slowly, bit by bit, he will dilute the gospel to cost humans their salvation. He set out to destroy the Sabbath, the great sign of God and his people. God says, I will give them my Sabbath as a sign that I am the Lord who made them holy. I'm going to stop here for a moment and ask, what does it mean for a human being to be holy? I'd like to quote the words from a song. It's the Lord's command, not the Lord's request. It means to hear the Lord and to answer yes. For the people of God, there remains a rest in holiness. The devil caused the Israelites to fall first in the worship of heathen gods. And when that didn't work, they did a 180 and lost it in rules and regulations. It became a burden. When Christ comes and restores the true meaning of the Sabbath, the devil has to attack it again. It is slow, it is insidious, but it happens. The emperor becomes a Christian. He stops persecution. He wants everyone to get along. Well, if we can mix a little of this and a little of that, the pagans are all into the day of the sun. Okay, maybe we can make it about the resurrection and everyone will be happy. I mean, you wouldn't want to be like the enemies of Rome, the Jews, would you? Sunday becomes a feast day, a day of celebration, and the seventh day is declared to be a day to fast and be sad and gloomy. You know what? Sometimes I think we still look at it that way. It works. People at their roots want to know that someone is in control, someone is maintaining law and order. The emperor disappears in about 476 AD, and slowly the Bishop of Rome takes his place. The people have been looking to Rome. They still look there. The Bible becomes a chained book. The people cannot read it. They trust their religious leaders for guidance. And they have no idea what the truth is. But every time a new edict comes out of a council, there's a small group of people who do know what the Bible says, and they are going to be driven further and further underground. And they will hide, and they will worship in secret, and they will preserve the Sabbath. It's not going to get lost, and many will preserve it at the cost of their lives. Isaiah says that darkness will cover the earth, and gross darkness the people. But the Lord shall arise upon thee, and his glory shall be seen upon thee. The Reformation is coming. The printing press is coming. The Bible will be put into the hands of the people. Education will become more available. People will think for themselves. The reformers will arise, and many will die in their defense of truth. But people will again understand that the just will live by faith. Slowly, the great truths of the Bible will be found again, and among them, the Sabbath. The dark ages are going to end. Okay, just in case anybody's trying to figure out what they're looking at, that's my father. A story, maybe a combo of stories. October 31, 1912, a little boy, all 12 pounds of him, was born in a house partway up the hill of Mount Royal in Westmount in Montreal. That winter, his parents will have him christened at Knox Presbyterian. After the family loses their money, his mom feels snubbed by the minister, and the boys, all 6 of them with a sister in the middle somewhere, will find themselves attending the Church of England, the Anglican Church. The father will die. As the oldest boys reach adulthood, Canada is plunged into the Great Depression. Every time the rent cannot be paid, they will move. They move into an apartment over Mrs. Upton and her son Sam. Now, I never got the impression that Sam was an Adventist, but he did work for the CNR, and he was able to get this little boy, now a young man, an apprenticeship with the railway in Montreal. Mrs. Upton, a Seventh-day Adventist, goes upstairs to share her faith with Mrs. Ream. The oldest son, Ted, has an apprenticeship with Northern Electric. He listens in with his mom. The apprenticeship ends, and Ted is offered a job. Offered a job in the 1930s. That is gold. Ted walks away. It's 6 days a week. Lionel, who is son number 2, the one with the CNR, thinks that Big Brother has gone soft in the head. You turned down a good job over a day? The little side story that I want to share is that Ted goes to Oshawa, to OMC. We now know it as Kingsway. Lionel and his mom are coming up to Toronto to go to the X. Ted pleads with them to get off the train in Oshawa and come see the school. They do. Lionel has one great wish, to get off campus because he needs to smoke. In his wildest dreams, he does not know that in about 40 years, he will be sending this school thousands of dollars as he makes a commitment to Christian education for his children. Lionel's apprenticeship finishes, and there's an opening in the CN Yards in Toronto. Does he want to go? Boards a train to Toronto. For reasons I wish I knew, but I never thought to ask, he finds the local Adventist church in Toronto, the one on Odd Street, and begins to study with the pastor. Lionel works nights in the Mimical Yards. Lionel has some safety rules. You do not walk between two uncoupled cars. An engine can be put on the front, the train backed up, and you will not know it until the boxcars come together. He had watched a man die like this in Montreal. If you need to get across the tracks, you climb up and over the boxcar. He was tired one night. He broke his own rule. As he stepped out from between the cars, he felt the coupler grabbing his coat. A rather shaken man walked over to Caboose, sat down, rolled a cigarette, and asked himself, if I died tonight, knowing and understanding what I have learned, where would I spend eternity? Dad told me once as he learned the truths of the Bible, he knew it was truth, and he couldn't argue with truth. Dad was baptized shortly after in a creek somewhere in the Oshawa area. Canada will come out of the Great Depression because World War II will break out. As the war intensifies, more men are needed, and the draft comes in. Dad was raised for king and country. He wants to go. He believes it's his duty to go, but Canada does not make provision for conscientious objectors, and Dad will not carry a gun. This picture, just in case you're wondering what you are looking at, is Christmas Day, 1942, in the Conchi camps. There's a reasonable number of Adventists in that picture. And what really touches me about this picture is these guys have basically been banished from civilization. Notice how many have the dignity to still want to wear a suit and dress up. They are living up in the Alberta bush somewhere. Dad's new faith, okay. He is a new Adventist, and nothing is coming together. Conscientious objectors went to the Alberta bush, the Conchi camp. If you're not going to help with the war effort, you don't belong in society. After a period of time, the Canadian government, this picture here. My dad's the one, bottom, the guy here, that guy on that side. That's my dad. And the man standing at the very back is actually a charter member of Willowdale. He will eventually come here and be part of this church. His name was Bert Hayward. Does that sound right? I think it was Bert Hayward. After a period of time, the Canadian government realizes that there are men out there who would help the war effort if their beliefs could be accommodated, and tells them they can enlist. Dad packs his bags and heads for the recruitment center in Calgary. They tell him they want to put him in the Royal Engineers repairing tanks. He says no. Tanks are used to kill people. No. He scores really high for that. But he says he wants to go into the medical corps. They tell him he's nuts, but if he wants to go in the medical corps, feel free. Basic training followed at Camp Borden in Ontario, and that's Camp Borden in Ontario. My dad is the second one on the left, and the second one on the right his name was Earl Copeland. He's going to eventually go on to run the ABC out in Alberta. Basic training, okay. And then there was a troop train to Halifax. Slight detour here. The son of a fellow Canadian Adventist soldier, John Corbin, shared his dad's story with me. Most of the rest of the story comes from the memories of John Corbin. As the Isle de France pulled away from Halifax harbor, this young man from the prairies asked himself one question. If this ship is on the bottom of the Atlantic tomorrow morning, where am I for eternity? Am I right with Jesus? Torpedoes don't ask about your standing with Christ before they take out the ship. Both Dad and John were sent to Aldershot about the same time. Aldershot was a major military center. It was a training base for the Canadians, and it was a strategic command hub. And things are going to begin to go south for the young SDA men from Canada. Dad's a little older than most of the people there, most of the young Adventists. He's in his early 30s. Most of these guys are teenagers. They're barely out of their 20s. And they're basically farm kids. At first, things were pretty lenient. You could get a weekend pass to go to the local church, and the local church members were wonderful to the Canadian boys. And some of their young ladies ended up back in Canada as war brides. Time passed, and after D-Day, things became much more restricted. One wasn't getting passes to go to church. One was expected to be out on parade grounds keeping fit, and that wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. To shorten the story, if you were not on the parade ground on Sabbath, you were in jail with the threat of court-martial, 3 to 5 years of jail time, dishonorable discharge, stripped of all post-discharge benefits, and a very difficult and disgraced return to civilian life, even maybe a little bit of hard labor. The Adventist young men were refusing to go on parade on the Sabbath, and that was disobeying a direct order at the front. It's not a good thing, and that's why they were landing in a military jail. There was one Adventist who worked in the kitchen, and he's the guy second from my right, I guess. Yeah, second from the right, my left. My dad's he's in the middle, and the guy right beside him is the guy I'm talking about. I remember him. He used to work at Branson in the kitchen there. So he finds out what's happening to his fellow Adventist, and he's able to get an emergency leave and go to London, and he's able to find the Adventist pastor, a man by the name of John Howard Sr. The pastor goes to the Canadian general in charge, who calls the American general and asks if they have SDAs in their ranks, and what do they do about their Sabbath? Yes, they did. They were excellent men, among their best, and their Sabbath was accommodated. On the day that the Adventist young men were to hear their fate, they were all brought in together. My dad was among them. Their case was dismissed. They were given token punishment of 10 days confined to barracks, and were told if they were ever seen breaking their Sabbath, so help them. This is a picture of Dad. He's getting ready at this point to come back to Canada. It's May of 1946. The Sabbath is not a to-do box to be checked. It is given to build and strengthen our relationship with our Creator, who is also our Redeemer. Does it really matter what day we worship on? I gave them my Sabbaths as a sign that I, the Lord, made them holy.